Since it's a little bit too hot outside to go out to create, I thought it'd be the perfect time to talk about if the Sony A7 IV is outdated in 2024. I got the Sony A7 IV when it first was launched and released, and it's been almost 3 years since owning this camera. I've used it plenty around the world. I've used it for photo and video needs, and to be honest, it's been a very primary camera for me to use. Even with my Sony A7S III, when I use it more for video, I still use this camera quite often when it comes down to having a very good hybrid camera. And after all this time, I started to wonder, am I gonna want to wait for the Sony A7 IV? Is this camera outdated? And how does it compare with what's out in 2024? Because there's been so many releases of new cameras. If you look at Nikon coming out with their Z6 Mark II or III, whatever it is now, that has like super unreal specs of video, that is a comparison of this camera. And you know, the Lumix S5 Mark II with the X or everything like that, shooting, you know, I think it's like ProRes RAW internally at 6K and having all these different modes of stuff, that you start to kind of wonder if the Sony A7 IV is that outdated and if it's good enough for 2024, or if you should just wait for the A7 IV or maybe go with a different brand. So I first want to talk about the price point of this camera. Whenever I got this camera, it was brand new. I think it was $2,500 when it was first for just the body, which was an increment of, you know, what it was for the Sony A7 III, about $500 difference. Now they do have this camera on sale fairly often to about $2,200 or $2,300 depending on the season. So let's give or take and say that it's going to be on average $2,300 now in 2024, because they're probably going to be keeping it on sale to combat, you know, the other cameras bringing out something new and to still try to sell some of these bodies, because to be honest, it's been a great hybrid camera. The Sony A7 III was one of the most sold cameras, I think, for Sony for a while, because it just would sell so well because of the spec points to the price that it just made sense. And that's one of the reasons why I had it. And then I went to the A7 IV mainly because of the video capabilities with the 10-bit color, since the Sony A7 III didn't have it. And now we're getting into other cameras that are coming out, like the Lumix S5 Mark II that has similar specs as the Sony A7 IV that's been out for a little bit now, but it comes in at $2,000, and most of the time they have it sometimes on sales for like $1,800 and whatever else that Lumix wants to do as well. They do have their S5 Mark II X, which is like the more pro video one that they have, that has, I think, for like the ProRes RAW and everything of that sort, which is quite nice because I believe it's only $200 more than the S5. And if they have it on sale, it's still cheaper than this camera. Now, the major difference will be is what you're looking for when it comes down to performance with the camera itself for the autofocus, stabilization, as well with the lens options. Lumix has pretty good stabilization now, and they're updated now. Autofocus has become a lot better, but is it better than Sony? That's more debatable on what you're wanting and what you're looking for. Now they do have, you know, decent lens selection when it comes down to their primary like Lumix line of lenses. The third-party lenses are starting to kind of get into it more and more, so you're gonna have some options that way. So now it comes down to with the new Nikon camera that came out, and I think it shot like, I can't remember, it was like 6K internally RAW or something like that, or 8K, which honestly, it's a beast of a camera. Which that camera with the Nikon, I think it's the 6K to 60 frames per second that it does, and I think it's on crop to my knowledge. I haven't really looked into it too much, but I've seen some of it because I don't shoot Nikon. I don't really care to look at all the cameras, but I'm just kind of, you know, going with that. But the price point for that is $2,500. So you start kind of thinking about, okay, those kind of specs that you get out of the Nikon coming into the Sony A7 IV, it's kind of making this one look a little bit outdated to me. And that's what kind of started making this video happen and get the ideas of it, because I was thinking about, would I really upgrade my camera, or is it really fine in 2024? And especially after picking up the Sony A7C Mark II, because I wanted a little bit of a smaller full frame camera for photos and with some video, because I do have my ZV-E one with the smaller compact body for videos, especially for travel. I kind of wanted to figure out something that would be more travel friendly for me, and that's why I got it. And I started noticing a little bit of the updated features that, to be honest, and I've made a video about this before, that Sony could give us with a firmware update. Even seeing my Sony A7S III getting a full-on firmware update, that it changed the menu settings and everything like that to have a little bit more like the ZV-E one. Still didn't get the custom LUTS, but you get a little bit of that firmware update that they can do. It lets me know that Sony could do that for the Sony A7 IV to make it more relevant into 2024. And to be honest, if we got the updates that I'll talk about, that would make this camera be even more updated for 2024, because side note, I still think that this camera is phenomenal for 2024. You can't really beat the price point for what you're getting out of it with the lens collection that Sony provides. But anyways, if you would get that firmware update to update this camera accordingly, you would have a phenomenal camera that you wouldn't really need to go and update to the latest version whenever it comes out. First things first is just if they added the custom LUTs to be able to be seen inside your camera like they have like the Sony A7C Mark II and the ZV-E1 and so on, would be perfect. That alone would be a killer feature to have in camera to be able to just film and use it accordingly, like how I do with my Sony A7C Mark II and ZV-E1. That helps out so much to not have to want to bring a monitor. Like right now, I'm filming actually with a monitor to be able to kind of see how the custom LUTs will look whenever I'm, filming inside or anywhere to go, and that I can bring my monitor. If I'm going to be out and about shooting, content or something like that, something quick that I don't really need to have, a whole ass setup, then to be honest, just having the in-camera LUTs to be able to see them on the screen would be more than enough for me. That update would be unreal, and to kind of keep it with how Lumix does it now with like their S9 line, where they are able to bake in the LUTs for their photos and edit them and stuff like that, and for video would be ideal. I would love to be able to have my custom LUTs within my camera to just simply be able to take photos and then maybe do some minor adjustments in post, but it has it like baked on it where I don't have to do too much. That would be kind of cool, and I think they can do it with a firmware update, since the FX3 was able to get a firmware update to have the custom LUTs in it. It's very doable in my opinion. Obviously, I'm not the engineer there, but it would just make this camera feel more relevant to 2024. Another thing that would be kind of cool to make this camera just feel more updated so that it just would keep up with other cameras, because for me personally, being able to have different crop modes, kind of like the GFX line of cameras do, where like you can have it in camera for the RAW, so whenever you import it to Lightroom, it has the crop already applied for you, so you don't lose that. You can do it with the A7C Mark II for the JPEGs and kind of crop it in camera and stuff like that, but you have to do it manually, which is still kind of cool. Obviously, like those kind of features that the A7C Mark II, it's the same camera but smaller. They could update a fair amount of things that are not really just more of like the AI or anything with autofocus that you would need to have a whole chip of difference, if you will. It's just something more within the camera that could probably update it, which would be nice to have, because it's very fun to have that expand mode to be able to take photos a different way. That would make this camera just so much more fun to go shoot with it and stay creatively, artistically feeling of it, instead of just feeling like a workhorse of a camera. Because this camera is just very great. I mean, I still recommend it to people in 2024, despite of it, being a 3-year-old camera now. It has just very good potential for photo and video. And if you need just one hybrid camera that has very good low light, very good photo, very good video, this is it. I don't even care about the 60 frames per second crop, to be honest. I still use it. It's still usable and everything. I don't use so much the 1080p S&Q mode for 120 frames per second, which if they would just honestly add it as not having to use it with the S&Q mode, but just through video, where you can have 10-bit and have a little bit higher, megabits per second to use for, file sizes to have more quality, would be ideal, and you would have this camera feel amazing. It would hold its value so well in 2024, because that's ultimately the video of this that you're watching, is how well could it hold up, and if it's outdated. And certain aspects feel outdated because of what you're starting to see in the other cameras and what is out there. And for me personally, I just think that this camera still feels very good in 2024. It's just those minor cleanup things that, to be honest, Sony could do without having to do overly too much. Whether they want to do, sadly, if it gets to this point, a paid kind of upgrade version to get a lot of those custom kind of things that you want to add to the camera, I feel like a lot of people would do it where you're not having to keep consistently coming out with new cameras, which I know it's going to be kind of redundant, because what's the model of, companies is to maximize their profits, and they're going to have to want to sell, volume of bodies all the time. But if they added that to essentially their older cameras, like the A7 IV, that's still relevant, you would still sell these and it wouldn't matter. You'd be selling volumes upon volumes, and then now updating them that way too. So it would be kind of cool to see that when it comes down to with Sony and just this camera itself, because it's a great camera to go with in 2024 and into 2025 now, because we're at the halfway mark where this year is about to end and everything like that. That's kind of weird to think about. But like I said, I think that this camera is still relevant in 2024, despite of how much the technology has improved in the last 3 years within the cameras, within even Sony's ecosystem and other companies. You have a lot of cameras starting to shoot 8K RAW internally, whether it's up to 30 frames per second, or if it's the 60 frames per second with the 6K RAW like the Nikon Z6 Mark III can. Obviously, this camera will feel and look outdated compared to those. But are you gonna need all those new upgrades on those cameras in today's world? Probably not, to be honest. Even for myself, I shoot mainly 4K 24 frames per second, some slow motion for some B-roll here and there. So like I said, it really is just gonna dive into what you need personally. And for me, if I know that I'm gonna have to shoot any relevant like a lot of slow motion, then I'm gonna bring my Sony A7S III because I have the 4K 120 frames per second. Even my ZV-E1 can do 120 frames per second at 4K. So if I know I'm gonna need no crop 4K 60 as well, I'll bring one of those cameras and not really use this one. But if I'm in a pinch or anything like that, this camera is gonna do the job perfectly fine to do 4K 60 even with the crop. And even if I need to do the 1080p SNQ mode with a 10-bit color, it'll still hold up fine for what most people need in social media videos or anything like that, because most people don't even notice it. But I don't want to drag this on any more than it needs to. I know it's going to be a little bit of a rant kind of video, but to be honest, I think the Sony A7 IV is not outdated completely in 2024. It's still a hot pick of a camera to get, especially with what you're getting out of this camera for 4K 24 frames per second. That's oversampled from 7.2K. You also get amazing autofocus and low light capabilities within this camera. Amazing lens selection, because you get third-party lens selection and Sony native glass. That there's really good amount of price range for full frame lenses, because usually they're more expensive. And as well, you get to have just an overall camera that performs very well for all your needs, despite of some minor outdated functions that it has, that hopefully, you never know, you can kind of hope for the best and bully, I guess, Sony a little bit further, because we did that with the Sony A7 III update. But to get some updated features into this camera, just to keep making it relevant going into the end of 2024 into 2025, so that people stay happier with their cameras, as I've been happy with this camera. It's done everything that I needed to do and more, because I've literally used this camera so much that it's paid itself and more whenever I've used it since I've bought it. And I think a lot of people can benefit from this camera going into it forward into the future, especially if you're wanting to get a great camera for a great price whenever it's on sale, so that you can put it to good use, and hopefully you can go out to create as much content as you want to, whether it's professionally or more for fun or for art purposes. Whatever is your case, hopefully you enjoy it. But with all that said and done, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. Make sure to like and subscribe, share this video with a friend. I'll catch you guys in the next one. See ya.